For the next session, I invite the chairpersons, Dr. Yash Lokanwala, Adjunct Professor of Biomedical Engineering, IIT Mumbai, Dr. Sudarshan Murthy, Professor and Head of Department in JJMC Davangere, Dr. Damodar Shenoy, Professor in KMC Mangalore, to kindly take your seats. I invite Dr. Sriram Rajgopal onto the dais to speak on diagnostic value of ECG in narrow QRS tachycardia in ICU. I request the chairpersons to introduce Dr. Sriram Rajgopal.
Good afternoon to all of you. In fact, I am Dr. Sudarshan Murthy from JSS Medical College, Mysore. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sriram Rajgopal, who is DM Cardiology, MBBS MD from Zipmat Pondicherry, DM GV Pant Hospital, 1982 has completed his DM. He is a Chief Cardiologist of Southern Railway Headquarters Hospital, Chennai. So now it's all over to you, sir.
Respected chairpersons, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I'd like to thank the organizers of ICE and Dr. Prabhakar, Dr. S.B. Gupta and everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be part of this meeting. As I said, right from early morning we have had a huge crowd in the hall, which shows how interested people are, and a lot of active discussion. In the next 20 minutes or so, I have been asked to speak on the diagnostic value of the ECG in narrow QRS tachycardia in the ICU. So I'll be focusing mainly on the ECG part of it and not on the clinical features or anything. First, to define terms, my job has been made a lot easier by my earlier speaker who had spoken on wide QRS tachycardia just before lunch. So narrow QRS tachycardia, to define our terms, is a cardiac rhythm with a rate more than 100 in an adult and a QRS duration of less than 120. And the narrow QRS, by convention, indicates that the AV conduction occurs via the AV node and the His-Purkinje system. The speaker on wide QRS tachycardia had already spoken on things like relatively narrow ventricular tachycardias like fascicular tachycardia, so I will not be covering those aspects. Supraventricular tachycardia is another term commonly used in the connection with narrow QRS tachycardias, but we need to remember that this encompasses a whole range of arrhythmias originating above the bifurcation of the His bundle, in which the QRS is usually narrow but may be wide due to either pre-existing bundle branch block, new bundle branch block, or due pre-excitation. Sometimes both can happen, and we'll be discussing this later in the talk. So since patients in the ICU are often on monitor with one lead, we need to look at this, and I'm sure most of you would agree that this QRS complex looks narrow. But when you add a few more leads, you see that what looks narrow in one lead doesn't necessarily look narrow in the others. The converse doesn't apply. If it's wide in some lead, it is wide. That's simple. But if it's narrow in one lead, you need to be sure that you have a couple of more leads to be really sure whether you're dealing with narrow or wide QRS. And this is something which is sometimes forgotten. The common causes are, of course, sinus tachycardia first in the ICU, caused by a whole range of mechanisms that I need not go into. And it's very important for physicians and even cardiologists to remember sinus tachycardia because we shouldn't lose sight of it. However, as cardiologists, we are more interested in AV nodal reentrant tachycardia, atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia, which is orthodromic. There was a long discussion on antidromic in the morning, so I needn't get into that. Atrial tachycardias, atrial flutter, and atrial fibrillation. We need a systematic approach, and I will focus on principles rather than putting up ECGs and asking you what you think about them. So you definitely need a 12-lead ECG during tachycardia. You cannot treat on the basis of single-channel or even two-channel rhythm strips. It's ideal if you have a 12-lead ECG during normal sinus rhythm to compare, as I will be showing in a minute. And this is one area where you don't just look at one ECG, but you do something and look at what happens to the ECG, what you might call interventional electrocardiography. So what are the features you look for? Is it regular or irregular? Is it dependent on the conduction through the AV node, or is it independent of conduction through the AV node relatively? Whether P waves are seen or not. If P waves are seen, is the interval between the R and P shorter or longer than the interval between P and R? And the morphology and axis of the P wave. As I will show you, all this is dependent mainly on how the arrhythmia occurs, and there is not really any need to just learn this up. You need to understand how it happens rather than just memorizing it. So the first step would be, is it regular or not? If it's not regular, it could be atrial fibrillation or atrial tachycardia or flutter with variable conduction. I think Dr. Green in the morning showed us various combinations of conduction in atrial flutter and so on. Or is it a multifocal atrial tachycardia? On the other hand, if you have a regular narrow QRS tachycardia, if you don't see P waves, almost always, with very rare exceptions, it is AVNRT. If you do see P waves, if there are more Ps than QRS, you're dealing with either atrial flutter or atrial tachycardia. And if the atrial rate is not greater, you need to look at the RP interval. You need to remember that the majority of these are reentrant tachycardias, so you essentially need to see how the atrium is related to the ventricular activation. If the RP is short, if it's very short, it's likely to be AVNRT. If it's short but slightly longer, it could be atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia or an atrial tachycardia. If the RP is long, essentially it would be between atrial tachycardia and permanent junctional tachycardia or a atypical AVNRT. This just reinstates what I just said. If the RP interval is very, very short, then it's AVNRT. If it's slightly longer, it could be atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia or atrial tachycardia, and these are the group of long RP tachycardias. Now, why does this happen? Typical AV nodal reentrant tachycardia goes down the slow pathway and up the fast pathway. So as I shall show you in a minute, the activation of the atria and the ventricles is simultaneous or practically simultaneous. So the P wave is very, very close to the QRS. On the other hand, in AV reentrant tachycardia, it has to pass down, go up the accessory pathway and activate the atria. Most accessory pathways will conduct fast. Sometimes if you have a slowly conducting accessory pathway, you can have a longer RP interval. So the P could either be buried in the QRS or in the terminal QRS in typical AVNRT. You would have a short R to P interval in accessory pathway mediated tachycardia as long as the accessory pathway conducts fast. And if the P is distant, it could be fast slow AVNRT or a slow accessory pathway or an atrial tachycardia. So this is in sinus rhythm. The impulse comes down, goes down the fast pathway and gets blocked in the slow pathway, and the ventricle is activated. But a premature impulse comes down, the fast pathway happens to be refractory, so the activity goes down the slow pathway. By the time it reaches here, the fast pathway has recovered. So you see activation of both the ventricles and the atria occurring almost simultaneously. The atria are activated from the low septum, which means that both the atria are activated practically simultaneously, unlike usually happens. And this gives rise to the ECG findings that are typically seen. And this is just the same thing during an EP study. These are the QRSs on the surface, and you can see that the atrial activation is almost simultaneous with the ventricular activation. How does that translate into the ECG changes? If you see this narrow QRS tachycardia and you look at the inferior leads, 2 and 3, there is no S wave. But during tachycardia, you see a small negative deflection just after the QRS, a so-called pseudo S wave. And this occurs because, as I showed you in the animation, the atria are being activated from below upwards. So the P wave axis, the P occurs at the end of QRS and has a axis which is infero-superior. Also in V1, you see a small deflection here which is not seen in sinus rhythm, the so-called pseudo R dash, because the activation is spreading towards V1 from the AV node. So the ECG features of AVNRT would be a regular narrow QRS tachycardia. The P would either not be seen or would be seen at the end of the QRS, producing the pseudo S in the inferior leads or the pseudo R dash in V1. This is the typical AVNRT, which forms the large majority of AV nodal reentrant tachycardias. Now we've already seen this. So in atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia, it has to go down the AV node, down into the His-Purkinje system, the ventricle, and then go back up the accessory pathway. So you can see that in contrast to the earlier trace, the ventricular activation and atrial are not simultaneous, although the atrial activation is fairly close to the ventricular activation. And so depending on how the pathway conducts, if it is a fast conducting pathway as is usual, the P is fairly close to the QRS. If the pathway conducts slowly, the P may be distinctly separated from the QRS. The P usually falls on the ST segment. Here you can see the P well in this lead. But in the precordial lead, sometimes it can produce significant ST depression, and some of these patients unfortunately are subjected to coronary angiography in a futile search for ischemia. You will also note that the pre-excitation is manifest only in the sinus conducted beats, because during the orthodromic tachycardia, the activation, as I mentioned earlier, is down the AV conduction axis, and the accessory pathway is used for retrograde conduction. QRS alternance is another finding that was earlier believed to be specific for atrioventricular reentrant tachycardias, but is now believed to be seen in any fast tachycardia. You can see that the amplitude of the QRS changes in almost all the leads. But this is not very specific. It can be seen in almost any very fast tachycardia. What about now what happens to the P wave? As I said, the atria are activated backwards through the accessory pathway. So depending on the location of the accessory pathway, you can use the morphology and axis of the P wave to tell you where the accessory pathway is. For example, in this very simplified diagram, antegrade activation is across the AV node His-Purkinje system, and you have a left lateral accessory pathway. So if you look carefully at lead 1 and at AVL, you can see distinctly inverted P waves. The atria are being activated from left to right, which tells you that the accessory pathway is on the left side. Similarly, if it was an inferiorly inserted pathway, you would see a different activation of the atria. To summarize, you have a regular narrow QRS tachycardia. P waves are visible, usually with a short RP interval, and the P wave morphology and axis help you to localize the accessory pathway site. Now we come to atrial tachycardias. You can see a tachycardia which appears distinctly faster here, and here during a continuous trip, you can make out that there are actually 2 P waves and 1 QRS, whereas here it has become 1-to-1 conduction. This tells you that the continuation of the tachycardia is not dependent on the AV node, and the tachycardia on the atrium would continue even if you had very high grade AV block, but depending on the conduction ratio, the ventricular rate would be determined. If you look at the morphology of the P waves also, you can make out that these are not sinus P waves. Now what happens if the P wave is midway between the 2 QRSs? Dr. Green had shown a somewhat similar ECG in the morning, and this way it could be difficult to decide about the RP, the PR, and whether there are actually more P waves than QRSs. But fortunately in this patient, the conduction ratio changed in a very short time, and you can make out that there are multiple P waves and more P's than QRSs. But if you see a P bang between 2 QRSs, you should suspect that another P could be, especially if then you could suspect that there could be another P which could be concealed within the QRS. Atrial flutter, of course, as we know, is a macro reentrant tachycardia in the atrium, and since some part of the muscle is constantly being activated, you have practically no baseline. You will only see the sawtooth or flutter waves which are characteristic and which are best seen when the ventricular rate is slower. Again, when carotid sinus massage, if in this part of the ECG it might be a little difficult to appreciate, but if the ventricular rate is slowed by any vagal maneuver, you can make out the flutter waves distinctly, and this tells you that you're dealing with atrial flutter. Atrial fibrillation, of course, is well known, and you see no P waves, but at very high rates, at high ventricular rates, the irregularity may be a little difficult to appreciate unless you record at faster speeds, because the very nature of the way we estimate regularity on the surface ECG, at very high rates it becomes difficult to assess. What happens if a tachycardia is both narrow and wide? Now if you look at this, you have a narrow QRS tachycardia on this side of the strip, but here you have a wider QRS which actually occurs right at the onset of the tachycardia, And this looks like a fairly typical right bundle aberrancy. It only means that you have a tachycardia where there was right bundle aberrancy at the beginning, and after some time, the right bundle kind of warms up and starts conducting normally, and you have one narrow QRS tachycardia. The mechanism of tachycardia is the same. It only looks different because of bundle branch aberrancy. On the other hand, in atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia, in this example, you have a left-sided bypass tract, and the tachycardia is going down the AV conduction and up the accessory pathway. Now, if the left bundle blocks, the tachycardia has to go down the right bundle, pass through the ventricle and go back. And so there is a change in cycle length between the tachycardia with the wide QRS and the tachycardia with the narrow QRS. If you go back to the previous slide, you'll notice that there is no change in the cycle length here. So how do we explain that? If you have reentrant tachycardia and a bundle branch block on the same side, the circuit becomes longer. But if you have AV and RT, whether in sinus, whether with normal bundle branch conduction or with one bundle blocked, it makes no difference to the tachycardia circuit. So only the morphology changes. Lastly, coming to vagal maneuvers and AV block, there are a variety of AV vagal maneuvers, of which carotid sinus massage is the most commonly used. And of note, eyeball pressure is not to be used as a vagal maneuver. So if you look at the response, sinus tachycardia might gradually or temporarily slow in rate. Atrial tachycardia would sometimes terminate, or you could have no effect. The atrial tachycardia would go on, but the ventricular rate might change because of slowing of conduction across the AV node. If you have atrial flutter, as I showed you, you would have temporary slowing of the AV of the ventricular rate due to AV block. Atrial fibrillation, again, the same thing might happen. In AV and RT or in circus movement tachycardia, you could either have cessation of the tachycardia if there was enough vagal tone, or you might have no effect. The same thing with adenosine. If there is no change in rate, possibly you haven't given enough, or it could be a relatively narrow QRS VT, but some of them even respond. If you have gradual slowing and then reacceleration, it could again be sinus tachycardia or a focal atrial tachycardia. If you have sudden termination, it could be either AV nodal reentry, AV reentry, a rare condition called sinus node reentry, or a focal atrial tachycardia responding to adenosine. And if there is persistent atrial tachycardia with transient high-grade block, you're dealing with flutter or atrial tachycardia depending on the rate. To conclude, or to talk of the summary of the features, if there is any AV block, it is very almost if there is AV block, either spontaneous or induced, AV and RT would usually terminate, but rarely, sometimes 2-to-1 can be seen in AV and RT. This is an exception. It virtually rules out circus movement mediated tachycardia, and in an atrial tachycardia, depending on the rate, you would classify it as flutter or atrial tachycardia. Electrical alternance, as I said, is common, especially at high rates with almost any mechanism. The P wave location, if it is hidden in the QRS or distorting the distal portion, very rarely the initial portion, it is AV and RT. If it is a short RP, it is AV reentrant tachycardia, or if it's a long RP, then you could have a atypical AV and RT or a AV RT with a slow pathway. In an atrial tachycardia, it could be anywhere, and the PR duration would depend on the site of origin and the AV conduction. Coming to the polarity of the P wave, in AV and RT, as I said, the atria are activated below upwards, so the P wave would be negative in 2, 3 and AVF. In an accessory pathway, it depends where the pathway is, and in an atrial tachycardia, again it would depend where the tachycardia is coming from. Aberrancy is relatively common in circus movement tachycardias. So the questions, if there is second degree AV block, depending on the, you look at the atrial rate. If it's more than 250, it's atrial flutter. Less, it's atrial tachycardia, or the rare possibility of an AV and RT with 2-to-1. QRS alternance is more related to rate. If the P is within the R, it's AV and RT. If the RP is less than the PR, then it is an accessory pathway mediated, or the three possibilities for a long RP tachycardia. If it is an infero-superior, It could be an atrial tachycardia or a septal accessory pathway or AVNRT. If it is other, it depends entirely on the site of the accessory pathway or the atrial tachycardia, and the same with the horizontal plane P-wave axis. So with these ECG features, it's fairly straightforward to deal with what you are, but in a very fast tachycardia, sometimes there are still surprises in the ECG, in the EP lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sriram, for that excellent and crisp account on narrow QRS arrhythmias in ICU, which is the most common arrhythmias we find in ICU. With this, we'll come to the end of this session. Thank you.
I now request Dr. Yash Lokanwala to felicitate our speaker, Dr. Sriram.